Hello! Our channel recently hit 700 subscribers, which is just fantastic. And to celebrate, I thought I would bring you my 7 favorite Yuri series. This was a pretty tricky list to put together, I gotta say. And unlike my past top lists, I'm not gonna bother with any fancy images or whatever, just this nice little real-time updating list here that I'll be using. Kind of low grade, but I think these stories largely speak for themselves, so I really encourage everyone to go check them out if you're a fan of the genre. The first one we're going to be talking about, though, isn't technically Yuri, I guess, because Yuri is a Japanese genre, and this is a Thai comic, but you know, it's close enough we're going to count it. Of course, here I'm talking about Lily Love, the story of two college girls, P-Mew and Donut, form a quick friendship that blossoms into something really beautifully romantic. It does a great job of mixing kind of external factors, pressures being put on them by ex-girlfriends or overbearing parents or crises with school and stuff, with a developing relationship. I think, you know, kind of having those things going on in parallel is something that Yuri really excels at as a genre, that you feel like you're growing closer to the characters both through their struggles and through these moments of intimacy. But what really makes this stand out for me above like a lot of other Yuri series is just the emotional maturity the characters have. So much of the drama in Yuri is often based around like misunderstandings, failures to communicate, situations where if they just talked to each other and were honest with each other and just expressed their feelings, everything would be patched up like in just one conversation, but they don't. And I don't dislike this. I think, you know, the kind of angst that can build around this and the intensity of the feelings when they can't be expressed is another great thing about Yuri. But this series, where the characters, you know, their first instinct is just to go talk to each other about how they're feeling, it's just a wonderful change of pace. And it creates this level of, I think, emotional stability that I really appreciate. It's not like a lot of other Yuri romances or romances in general where everything is made so dramatic and intense that you feel like the characters are just on the knife's edge of their relationship crumbling at all times, which, although compelling, can sometimes feel almost too frantic. So I think Lily Love is really wonderful in that regard. As for a series that's kind of more on that side, we turn to our 6th one, which is Prism. It's kind of a controversial series. The author has many controversies surrounding him. We're not really going to get into that. Prism, I think, brings about a quality in Yuri series that I really like, which is sort of like this paradise type feel. And it's so much of it takes place during their school trip or a vacation to the beach or staying in their teacher's house while she's away. It's all these sort of like not at home locations where the day-to-day struggles are completely forgotten. This really kind of utopia type sense. But it's not like a fantasy world utopia. It's something that's definitely realistic at the same time. I think the best way I can describe it is like, when I was in high school, you know, I had a lot of friends. I got along with pretty much everyone. But I wasn't one of like the cool kids. And even though I didn't kind of like brood over it or obsess over it, I had this sort of awareness that there's probably like parties I'm not being invited to. There's probably kind of cool things happening that I'm not even really aware of. And that even beyond that, there's like a hidden private life that those people have that's removed from these kind of fashionable parties and stuff. And I think Prism brings that fantasy, that even though I'm sure my mental picture of what was really happening is way off the mark, Prism brings about that fantasy, I think, in a really great way. The other thing I love about this series is actually the fact that it got canceled, which sounds weird. But I think Yuri series in general, I hope this isn't too controversial of opinion. I've heard a lot of people say this. Yuri series often have bad endings. And it's not really any particular series' fault. I think it's just sort of the genre makes it hard, right? Like, think about it. If you have it end with the standard, and then they lived happily ever after, that's almost does disservice to the entire series up until that point. Like, you know, they were struggling. They had gone through all these big emotional arcs. the fact that they got together is sort of like a triumph, over all that adversity. And then just to say, all right, but from this point on, everything is just Gucci, they're just happy every single day. It really feels inauthentic and a little, it's not awful. And most Yuri series kind of do this to some extent. And then if you don't do that, though, if you don't just have the standard happily ever after ending, what are you going to do? Have like a big twist at the end? That doesn't really work either, because then, Yuri, which is all about kind of showing like a thorough, delicate, complete look at like someone's emotional state, doesn't really jive with having like a sudden twist finale. So that's not so good either. I think where Yuri stories do have great endings is in Yuri Dojinshi. Like in one-shot stories that are just one chapter long, and within 20 to 30 pages, you can actually have something that has a complete definitive ending that doesn't kind of do disservice to some number of chapters before that. Do you kind of get what I mean? So Prism, even though it is a continuing series, by ending so abruptly and kind of leaving so much unsaid, it kind of has the feel of a doujinshi too. So I think that's definitely a really cool thing about it. Another series that kind of has a similar thing is the fifth one. This is not so popular. Maybe you've never heard of it. It's called Husky Medli. And this is actually based on a thread on 2channel, which is the Japanese message board that kind of spawned image board culture and 4chan, and don't get upset about it or anything. It's not its fault that it eventually led to 4chan and Poll and lots of other horrible things that we won't get into now. But on this thread, which starts off very innocently, it's about this girl wanting to get to know her classmate's weakness. That there's this seemingly perfect girl in her class, and she wants to learn her weak side. And the whole series takes place as this sort of dialogue between Medli and the commenters on her thread, which kind of is pretty humorous at times and lends the whole thing this kind of irreverent, sometimes disturbing or silly vibe, which goes really nicely with the actual romantic plot, which is very traditional, just sort of these girls getting to know each other better and better, and eventually finding and expressing these romantic feelings for each other, which is just wonderful and romantic. And it kind of takes place on this awesome superposition of reality. Like, if you've ever been on 4chan, you've probably seen that disclaimer, everything posted here is a work of fiction, only a fool would take it for fact. But at the same time, you always really do want to take it for fact, right? You always want to think what people are writing actually reflects in some way the reality of their situation. And even if this story didn't actually happen, you definitely believe that all the posts that are being shared were at least posted. Even if they weren't true posts, they actually did exist, because it really does replicate the way people post on these sites very well. And things like, oh man, there's one scene where Medli gets a letter from Husky, and she actually takes a picture of the letter and posts it in the thread. Now again, she could have faked it, but it really does give you the sense that this sort of story is happening somewhere in the world. That even if this thread is fake, these sort of stories are real. Which isn't so surprising, because there's nothing too fantastical, nothing too unbelievable or anything. But it really makes you understand in your heart of hearts that these sort of romances are happening all the time, which I think is just wonderful. And that's a very unique thing, I think, about this series. Moving right along, our fourth is The Feelings We All Must Endure. Endure. Good spelling. This is another pretty non-traditional Yuri series, whereas all the other series on this list, including the ones we haven't talked about yet, spoiler alert, focus really all on one couple. There are 7 major characters in this series, all of them girls at this one college, and their romances and relationships and fights and struggles are so convoluted and tangled up with each other that in an early chapter, actually I think in several points in the series, the author encourages you to draw a map, like I don't know if I think it's a woman. She provides like a circle with all the characters, and you can draw lines between them to keep straight everyone's relationships and stuff. Which sounds kind of silly, but this is actually an extremely psychologically intense series. I think this is one of the ones that really made me want to start, even if it wasn't going to be in this form of like kind of video blogging about manga and doing live reactions and stuff. But this is one of the ones that really made me want to share my feelings about Yuri manga with the world. Because man, the series gives you some intense feelings. I remember reading it once, and I think I remember the point too, but I don't want to spoil what it is. There was something that made me like jump up in my chair. I'm not going to do it right now because I think I'll knock this chair over. It was a different chair, and do like, you know, the L pose from Death Note. I was thinking like, oh my god, like what am I doing? Like why am I sitting like this? And it was just because I was so caught up in the dramatics of the series. I was so invested in the characters' feelings. And the fact that a manga can do this, I think, is so powerful. It's something that we really should recognize. So yeah, I think the series really excels in that regard, that there's so much, I guess it's just the deep flaws of the characters are so powerfully resonant with you that you're at once identifying with them and pitying them and hoping for their triumph, but also kind of condemning them and feeling that sort of, but this is your fault, and like, come on, just understand, and that kind of frustration, which just amplifies everything else you're feeling. It's a really wonderful series. And talking about good endings, again, I don't want to spoil it, but this one really does knock it out of the park. There's kind of a twist, there's kind of a revelation. I think the word that I should use for it is epiphany, in the style of James Joyce. There's an epiphany that one of the characters has near the end that is just so satisfying it almost hurts. It's beautiful. Okay. In our third place, probably one not too surprising for anyone who's been watching this channel, Bloom Into You. Oh, it's so wonderful. I think this is one of those miraculous Yuri series that comes along not very often, where not only does it just, all the Yuri fans fall in love with it, not only does it appeal to established fans of the genre, but it actually can cross over into new audiences and make them understand the appeal of Yuri. I think Hibike Euphonium is like another series that's done this. Even though it's not explicitly Yuri or Yuri focused to some extent, I mean, you know, it is starting to shift in that direction. The author of Bloom Into You is also a huge fan of Hibike. But it's something where I think people who had never really even thought about Yuri as a genre that they could like, maybe they had dismissed it in some form or another, thinking it's kind of perverted or it's just about fan service or whatever, have started to really understand some of the unique appeals of the genre through this series. It follows, you know, as most of these other series, two girls in high school, a senpai and her kohai, both working on the student council. The kohai feels like she is incapable of romance. She just has this kind of aromantic distance from everyone. Even though she's sort of interested and fascinated by it, she just does not feel it in her heart. And her senpai, although she can relate to this and kind of has struggles of her own around personal identity and wanting things and being true to herself, immediately falls in love with her kohai and begins to really actively romantically pursue her. So that's a little unconventional, that's a little bit of a twist, but from this sort of basic subversion, they've just like really dug in and presented, I think, some of the best emotional writing in any Yuri series, where everything is just so precisely articulated and wonderfully expressed, and nothing feels like unjustified or irrational or absurd. Everyone is kind of working towards their own motivations with, you know, understandable. It's like The Wire or something, you know? Just a character drama that is so complete and so beautifully self-contained that it's I don't know, it's just beautiful. I don't really know how to put it any better than that. Okay. But there are things that I like even better than that, as much as I love Bloom Into You. The second place is Kaze-san. Oh, I love Kaze-san. Kaze-san is just... You'll notice, nowhere else in this list have I praised the artwork of a series. And I actually love the artwork of all of these series in different and unique ways, but none of them anywhere near as much as I love the art in Kaze-san. It is just the pinnacle of cuteness, the pinnacle of moe. Every single page just is exploding with beauty and delight. And not just in the artwork, but in the arrangement of the panels and like the character designs and the mise-en-scene, the settings they use. Everything is just perfect. It's so gorgeous. I dare you to pick any page from any chapter of that series and say that it's not wonderful, and say that it's not just the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. All that aside, the story, again, pretty simple. We have the athletic, boyish Kaze-san, the more demure, although kind of tomboyish in her own way, Yamada-san. They're developing romance, the external complications, the angst around the intensity of their own feelings, all that standard beautiful Yuri stuff, but just taken to this pinnacle of fluffiness and cuteness and warmness that I don't think we've seen anywhere else. It's just fantastic. I'm not even caught up on it. I'm like 6 chapters behind, and it's just because reading it it's like honestly like excruciating to see something this beautiful. It feels almost like fragile, that you can't even handle it too directly, or else it'll just crumble away in your fingertips. Oh, it's so good. But number one, even after all that intense praise, I still have to give it to Girlfriends. Of course it's Girlfriends, and of course right here I've got the 2 volumes of Girlfriends. Even though I don't have like any of my other manga at this house where I'm staying during school, I made sure to bring Girlfriends, because there is no time at which you do not want to be reading or rereading Girlfriends. What can really be said about this series? It's like Yuri the Yuri. In so many videos on my channel, you'll see me talking about like traditional Yuri things. I'll say like, oh, the traditional move here is to have the characters go on a date or whatever. That's all from here. That's all because I've seen it in Girlfriends. And I think there's something to be said about a series that can make itself that iconic, that definitive. And yet, it's not just that. There's a lot of stuff in here that is like really fresh, really bold. There's like frank conversations about sex and drinking. There's some side plots usually about kind of vilifying men that are like pretty, I don't know, kind of radical in their own way. And it really lends the series this feeling of, like we've talked about ones that feel kind of real, like Husky and Medli, or the feelings we all must endure, where things are kind of gritty, not everything is kind of lovey-dovey and perfect, but you know, people behave in super realistic ways. And then we've talked about like super fluffy things like Kaze-san or Lily Love to some extent, has some real fluff in the relationship. Or even something like Bloom Into You, which is this really kind of self-contained character drama, which feels almost removed from the world in its like perfection and in the extremely precise ways all the characters interact. Girlfriends, I think, takes place in a sweet spot of all of this, where not only have they defined a very clear portrait of the real world, one that feels realistic and feels something maybe not that you've experienced, but that you kind of know is out there, sort of like Prism. I'm trying to connect it to like all of them. So it creates this sort of world out there, but then the relationship within that world that is contrasted outside of that with the outside world, the warmth between the 2 main characters is like the same sort of beautiful fluffiness and just overwhelming feelings of love of Kaze-san. It's fantastic. But I think, though, you know, above and beyond all of that, as I was rereading this recently, it really struck me. I think for me, the most important thing about Yuri's about Girlfriends is that it's a story of transformation. We don't really know too much about Mari-chan before the series starts. We're not really led to believe that she was like suffering and moping around and totally lonely, but she talks often about how Ako isn't really just her first girlfriend, but her first strong friend in general, like her first really good best friend, if you want to say. And that the processes are all kind of paralleled of her coming out of her shell, her developing all these new interests, making all these new friends, and this love blossoming. And I think it really speaks to a potential that, you know, everyone kind of has, that this miraculous relationship, this beautiful thing can happen to them to kind of sweep them up off their feet. That holds a lot of appeal to me. And although there is no way that I will ever be transformed into a Japanese schoolgirl, unfortunately, it does sort of speak to a certain potential that the world holds. And it really kind of fills me with hope in a strange way. So, I mean, I've talked a lot about this importance of Yuri, and I've kind of talked explicitly about some of my own desires that are unfulfillable and such. But on a more positive note, I wanted to share with you this passage from a book. Maybe this will be kind of how we leave it. This is a passage I read a bit ago. It's from this author, Karl O. Knausgaard. He's a Norwegian author. He spent 6 years of his life writing this incredibly long... Oh, I'm sorry, it's 6 books long. I think he wrote it in 4 years, though. This autobiographical series of novels. And I've been reading them pretty much all year. I'm into the 5th one now. And I saw this passage, and I was just struck by it. I think how beautiful it is. So I'll read it to you now. It's about him when he's, I think, 19. He's just started at college. He's just got his student loan. And he's just out running some errands. Nothing too fantastical is happening. But we'll see what happens. On the way back, it began to rain. And it wasn't just the odd drop or two gradually increasing in intensity, which I was used to. No. Here it went from 0 to 100 in 1 second flat. One moment it wasn't raining, the next, billions of drops were falling to the ground at once. And from the road around me came a splattering, almost a clattering sound. I jogged downhill, laughing inside. What a fantastic town this was. And as always, when I saw or experienced something wonderful, I thought of Ingvlid. So that's the girl he likes. I probably didn't pronounce her name right. Ingvlid. Anyways. She was a living person who existed in the world with her own way of perceiving it, her own memories and experiences. She had her mother and her father, her sister and her friends, the countryside she had grown up in and walked in. All this resided within her, this immense complexity that is another person, and of which we see so little when we are with them. Yet it is enough to like them, to love them, for it takes nothing for this to happen. 2 serious eyes that suddenly beam with happiness, 2 playful, teasing eyes that suddenly become unsure or introspective, that falter. A person faltering, is there anything more beautiful than that? With all their inner richness, yet faltering all the same. You see it, you fall in love with it, and it is not much. Perhaps you will say it is not much, but the heart is always right. It never errs. The heart never errs. The heart never, ever errs. Oh, I think that's so beautiful. And though it strikes me so deeply now, I realized when I read it that I understand it because of Yuri. That I can remember a time, 6 or 7 years ago before I started reading Yuri, that this passage would have fallen flat to me. I would have thought, whatever, in my angsty teenage love, whatever. And it's because I really didn't identify with any sort of thing like this until I started reading Yuri. I couldn't really understand these feelings or the depth of these emotions or the depth of this longing until I saw something in Girlfriends, until I saw the relationship of Mari and Ako and all these other wonderful Yuri relationships that I've read over the years. So in the end, it really made me realize, Yuri is the way that I understand love. Yuri is the way that love becomes real to me in all these forms. Like, this is of course about a heterosexual relationship, and yet Yuri kind of unlocks that meaning for me. And I think that's really important, that I have this sort of thing in my life, and I feel unbelievably blessed that I can share these feelings I have about it, and to discuss it with this growing group of people. And all I hope is that it keeps growing like this, and that I keep getting to share these wonderful stories with you. So thank you so much, and I'll see you later.